Welcome everybody to the third annual State of Lightning Talks. We will begin in a couple of minutes, but this is where you can get extremely brief, where you can see 17 different open source projects, each doing their own elevator pitch for why their project is exciting this year. We have a couple of fun bits towards the end, so even though this session will be 95 minutes, it will be worth staying until then. As I was telling the speakers, we also try to make it fun and make sure the speakers stick to the time limit. This is what we call the hourglass of death. This measures out approximately 5 minutes. And when this runs out, Matthew, where are you sitting, Matthew? Will honk the horn of doom to let the, because after all, if an Indian taxi horn is not a horn of doom, I don't know what is. To let the speaker know that they will be finished. So there will be one after another. Applaud all you like between speakers, but hold your questions until you can corner the people down in the hall because there's no time for questions. So, all that said, we've got a couple of minutes, and let's see what we get.
Josh, why are you using OpenOffice?
What?
Why are you using OpenOffice?
Because OpenOffice for Mac kept crashing on me, that's why.
I guess the latest version, 3.0, beta 2.
Okay, I couldn't find 3.0 anywhere in the site.
I'll send you the link. It's not that bad.
Okay.
Beta 2 doesn't track me.
What?
Beta 2 doesn't track me.
Yeah, I was trying to use 2.4 and it just got cold.
2.4 is non-strip.
Yeah.
3.0 is non-strip.
Yep. Okay. Well, so, that being said, are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Denise? Okay. You see that okay, Matthew? Well, you can sit down, you can stand up. Here's Mike. And here's your pointer device.
Hi, everybody. Okay.
Thanks a lot. So this is Danese Cooper from the Open Source Initiative.
Who doesn't know what OSI is? Does anybody know it? Excellent. That's going to make it really fast. So, hi. I've been on the board of the OSI since 2001, which seems like forever to me. And I'll be on the board a bit longer yet because we have 3-year cycles, and I just got reconfirmed, so it'll be at least that many longer years. So I'm going to tell you what's new with OSI. We have been asking ourselves this question this year. We ask ourselves this question many years, but this year we're really seriously focusing on what we can do to change OSI. We had a fishbowl session at OSCon last year that was totally helpful. We got a lot of really good suggestions because this was the question we were asking. And so we've implemented many of those, but we're still asking the question. And the meta answer that we've come up with is that it would be nice if we ran it like an open source project. Seems like a no-brainer looking at it now, but it was a big aha to us. So increasingly over this next year, you will see OSI more and more transparent. And there's already a fair amount of transparency. Oh, sorry. So we already have our minutes posted publicly on our website. We already have a public blog. But we're going to put, and License Discuss is already a public archive, but it's not very searchable, and people have complained about that. So we're transiting all of those archives to a more searchable format. We, as you may have seen if you've been to opensource.org recently, we have a different website than we had 2 years ago, although we actually launched this website at OSCon last year. It's got great traffic, a lot of people really like it, so we're doing well with that. The big news is that we put in a track system that we're going to use to do more objective tracking of all the issues that are brought to us and how responsive we're being to solving them. And there's a whole bunch of, and this was one of the suggestions that came out of the fishbowl, there's already quite a few issues in the track system, and we'll be talking about it more at lunchtime today is our public meeting. So if you came to the last one and you want to gripe still, or you have new stuff to say, we would love to have you show up. We're also going to establish membership, formal membership. Now, we're using the Apache model for membership. So in Apache, a member is a person in the Apache community, is a person who is invested in that community, has shown up, has done real work, has committed for a number of years, is known to everyone and trusted, and they are elected by their peers as members. It's a lifetime thing, although right now Apache is looking at whether there should be some conditions for minimum participation. But they have about 300 members who make decisions for the foundation, and there are a number of decisions that are only made by member vote, and that's something that we're going to start doing. So we have just recently established, what is it, deep sometimes? We have just recently established a charter membership. I can't tell you too much about who they are yet because we're in the process of agreeing to wording for an announcement, but you will recognize probably every name on the list. We tried to pick people who were sort of unassailably recognized as open source contributors, and it's our intention that these people will not only figure out how to replicate themselves, bring more members in, get more people involved on a membership level, but also how to elect the board in future and take some of the larger decisions that OSI needs to take so that we can be more representative of the community. We have other levels of membership. When I say member, the voting members are going to be this body, unless for some reason the charter members decide to do it a different way. But we think we're following the Apache model and that there will be voting handled that way. But there are opportunities to become an individual organizational member as well. And we are going to start having annual members meetings as well, because when we change our bylaws to be a member organization, which we will do sometime in the next year, we're working with our lawyers now to do that, we'll have to have a members meeting as part of the running of that. We have new board members, as we do every year. We always have a couple new board members, and this year we have an international focus in our board members. There's an opportunity to see OSI and the things that OSI needs to do in the world with fresh eyes. These are our new board members this year. So Nena is from Africa. She's the leader of Phosphor Africa, which is a nonprofit organization that pushes open source through Africa. And it's a big continent, so she's a busy woman. Harshad Bune is an educator. He's great. He puts on a conference called GNOME that some of us have spoken. Whoa! I never run out of time. Okay, that was it.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, we have James Dixon, who's going to be talking about Open Scrum. Set up.
Thank you.
We're ready to go.
Excellent. I'm James Dixon, the founder and CTO Chief Geek. It says on my business card at Gentoo. We have an internal methodology that we use in order to promote open source. We're trying to engage the community, so we need a methodology that scales both internally and externally. So we've created a methodology that we're putting out there to get contribution on called Open Scrum. And it's an agile methodology for open source projects. Open source is not a methodology, it's a set of principles and practices that are commonly used for open source projects. There's nothing actually in open source that tells you how to do it. So the set of freedoms, the principles that we're all familiar with out there, openness, transparency, learning often, those are all self-evident that those are useful, but there is no methodology for open source. Agile is also a methodology. It's a collection of principles. Most of you are familiar with these, the rapid and continuous delivery of software, face-to-face communication, simplicity, acceptance and adaptance to change. And there are several implementing methodologies, XP, Scrum, that all have their own different take on those principles and how to put them into practice. So if Agile is a set of principles with several defined methodologies, and open source is a set of principles with no defined methodology, how about we try and create an Agile methodology for open source. If we look at the agile principles and see how they line up with open source, the first one, the rapid continuous delivery of useful software, aligns up very well with the early and often transparency principles of open source, so that one's easy. Working software is delivered frequently. That is up to the projects. Sometimes that software is, sometimes it isn't. If you have a subversion, it's instantaneous. If you deliver a bundle of binaries and source every 6 months, then it's not. Agile says working software is the principal measure of progress, and that's very much the case in open source. Next Agile principle, even late changes in requirements are welcomed. That's typical in open source projects, but it's pretty much up to the administrators and core developers. Close daily cooperation between business people and developers almost never happens in open source. Something else that almost never happens is face-to-face conversation is the best form of communication. So these are principles of Agile that are very hard for open source projects. The next Agile principle, projects are built around motivated individuals who should be trusted. In open source, they're sometimes trusted, they're sometimes flamed to within an inch of their life. It's up to the culture of that open source community, how well they're trusted. The bigger issue here is that when Agile says projects are built around motivated individuals, what they mean are people who are dedicated 100%, preferably 100% of the time is devoted to that project, so that you can time box releases and you get dedication and commitment from those people. That, with an open source community, is not possible. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. The many eyes principles. The principle takes care of this one pretty much. When it comes to simplicity, that sometimes comes out in open source projects. If there's enough people involved, that's typically how it comes out. Self-organizing teams is an Agile principle. Open source projects have no alternative other than to do that really. And the regular adaptation to changing circumstances, again, is really up to the project leads and the culture of that project. So when we look at it, there's a 45% good fit between Agile and open source, 36% of the principles is an okay alignment on, and 18% of them are bad. So Open Scrum is based on Scrum. I'm probably going to change the name because by the time I've adapted it to the open source principles, there's almost nothing left of Scrum in there. It's still Agile. It's a very simple and flexible template-based methodology. One of the things, the basic template says, tell us about your project in a standard way. One of the things that I find frustrating is going to a website for a project and trying to find out if there's a roadmap. Some projects have one, some don't. The ones that don't tell me that they don't. So it's more satisfying to put on a blindfold, go into a dark room and look for a black cat that isn't there. So the template says, do you have a roadmap? Yes or no. It's okay if you don't, but just tell us. What are the licenses? It allows you to have sub-projects and sub-projects and sub-projects. There's a bomb tonight. 8 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you, James. So next up, we have Monty, chief founder of MySQL, to tell you what's going on this year. So welcome, Monty.
Thank you. So, quick presentation what's happened since last week.
Where did the pointer go? Do you still have the pointer, James? Oh, there it is. Never mind.
So, what's new in the MySQL server? As you see, nothing new. We haven't done any releases. But we have done that's one for the user point of view. From internal, we have done lots of bug fixes. We are getting closer to something called GA. If you are using just 5.0 features, 5.1 is actually better than 5.0 at this point. It's just the new features that we are not entirely happy with. We are working with those. And we have also been working on things in 6.0, like online backup, that seems to get close to. and we have done lots of optimized changes for subqueries that people have been a bit unhappy with. And we have added new join methods to fix some of the performance problems for existing customers. And in a DB plugin that was released by Oracle is a major step for InnoDB, and we also have feedback Steve doing a major release this year. And they did the sensible thing, when they did a lot of changes, they went from beta to alpha. So, for those who missed, we are now part of Sun, and things are really good in Sun. Sun is a really developer-friendly environment, and I think they will do a lot of good for Scrum. Crisis. As those who have followed noticed that we had announced immediately after the Sun acquisition that some part of MySQL will be closed source. Sun did really not like that. This was the old management who did it, and they were forced to go back. So life is good at Sun. They are dedicated to open source. We switched to use Bazaar, just to make it easier for people to participate. We have started a public bug hunt for MySQL. So if any of you know any bugs in MySQL 5.1 or in MySQL that affects 5.1, please go and report it, or if the bug is already there, put a mark that it affects you too. This is really important. I'm deadly afraid that they're going to release 5.1 too early. And if you don't get people to participate and marking that this affects me too, in that case that bug is not likely to be fixed. And I'm working on internal reconstruction or development to ensure that we don't have to do this for mistakes. So, please, mark bugs, tell other people to do that. I want this information to spread. You can do it, affect what is fixed. And we have a new MySQL forms, and we have started the case issues. We have done in the Maria engine that I'm working on, we have done 2 releases. I will talk about that. We will have something that is usable within a month, and we are about to hope to be able to replace MySQL, MySQL in the DB with that one. And we had a fork drizzle that Brian will talk about. And that's that.
Thank you very much. So, next up is supposed to be Scott Kveton from OpenID, but I don't see... Oh, okay. Get up here.
Wow. You know,
Okay, who's going to point to?
I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay, hold on a second.
Alright.
Flip the hourglass, and Scott with OpenID.
Thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Kveton. I'm on the board for the OpenID Foundation. This is my son, Jivio, who's wearing his Twitter t-shirt. I'm pretty excited about that. So I'm going to talk about OpenID really quick. OpenID is a very simple tool for doing single sign-on. It's a protocol. It's HTTP-based. It's been around for a while. You've probably heard of it. So I'm going to skip to the next slide. Let's see here. So in terms of adoption, what we've seen in the last year, we've got the kind of graph that you want to see with the adoption of some kind of technology, the hockey stick. So here we are. It's chugging along. And we continue to see lots and lots of line parties coming online, although the news that everybody hears about are the big companies that are just becoming OpenID providers. There are actually now 20,000 sites out there that support this. OpenID today is only 3 years old, so it's literally 3 years ago that the idea was even created, that even came up. So to have the kind of adoption that we've seen in this short time is fantastic. I think it's great. About 500 million OpenIDs out there. I would be willing to bet that it's less than 0.5% that know that they're using OpenIDs, but that's okay. The reality is for email, my mom got email, she didn't get SMTP, and if you ask most users on the internet, they wouldn't know that they're using SMTP, right? Yeah. He agrees. Lots of people supporting the technology, continuing to support it. I was actually really psyched. Yesterday, Dig announced for the second time that they're supporting OpenID, and they still don't have it on their site. Maybe third time's a charm. So we released OpenID 2.0 in December. Really glad to get that out there, and that paved the way for folks like Yahoo and others to provide provider support on their sites, and that's been going really well. Let's see here. What's next? OpenID sucks. From a usability standpoint, it's absolutely awful. There's some folks who've gotten together who are working on things like email address to URL translation, the ID selector, and ClickPass that are hopefully going to deal with some of these usability issues. And I'm really hoping they actually gain some traction because people can't remember a URL. It's just not, does not make sense in my opinion. Lots of security things coming along too. OpenID is, when it was originally created, was meant for probably the first 80% of use cases, and now we need to start dealing with some of those 20%. Use cases that are a little more difficult and a little more, concerning about security and things like that. Let's see here. Integration with a lot more protocols. OpenID is an awesome building block, but we need more technology to be sitting on top of it. In other words, applications that can take advantage of this thing. And we're getting there. OpenID Foundation was incorporated, 2 years ago. It's been going really well. And one of the things I wanted to mention, and this has been a really interesting thing, we actually added 5 corporate board seats, and so now there's a total of 12 board seats, and it's very interesting how the whole organization itself has changed since that happened. We actually have regular meetings and things like that, and it's good. We're actually getting things formalized, which is fantastic. And then we're going to be doing elections again this August, and that's it on OpenID. Not much going on other than people adopting it, and it's chugging along slowly but surely. It's kind of like a glacier. It's really slow and it's hard to stop, even if it sucks. So I do love it to death, but I'm critical of something that I'd like to be better and better all the time. So, and that's it. Haha! Didn't need the horn.
Jivio, what do you think of OpenID?
Do you like OpenID?
I love it. All right. Thank you very much. So next up, Donnie Berkholz for Gentoo.
Hi everyone, I'm Donnie, and I'm one of 7 people right now who are on the council which runs Gentoo and tries to make sure it's going in a good direction and stuff. Over the past year, it's been a year of problems and trying to solve those problems. I'm going to talk about 2 of those today. One of them is the community, and the other one is the release, which we actually ended up canceling a release, and then the second one was delayed for 4 months. So we're really happy we finally did make a release. And I made this title because Gentoo is just getting old enough that a lot of the senior original developers are quitting, and we're starting to see some turnover in kind of the new generation leadership. And like I was saying, community is one problem we're trying to fix, and this graph is showing you how many of our developers were involved in electing the new leadership. And what you can see is that the first year we had a council, we had a lot of voters. Then for a couple of years, people cared a lot less. And then this year again, people really started to care about community issues again because a few bad apples were really ruining the whole thing for everybody. And so we got a lot more developers turning out and saying, we really support the people who think that poisonous people are a real issue that need to be dealt with in Gentoo. And this is a set of kind of interesting graphs, and basically we have a strange voting system called Condorcet, and it's kind of like Debian. But how it works is that instead of voting for a single person, you actually rank all the candidates. And I like it because it's kind of a better way of voting. And what these are showing you are what the results look like. They're all kind of histograms. So if they're kind of up and to the left, that means you're doing really well. And if they're up and to the right, you're doing really poorly. And I'm showing you on the left 3 people who are on the council. Sort of up and to the left are kind of even. And everybody who was on the former council who ran again got reelected. So that's saying, people think this is important, community is important, because that's been a major issue over the past couple of years. We just recently finally kicked out 3 people. And getting elected after that was really a referendum that says, we support what you're doing in Gentoo, even if we aren't talking about it. And on the right, you can see that's what it looks like if you're at the very bottom of the list. And those are 3 people who think community is unimportant. So it's really a strong support from the entire development community saying, we care about this. Also, we made a release, 2008.0, which was supposed to come out in something like February. We actually released it a few weeks ago. We ended up canceling our second release in 2007 because there just were a lot of security issues, and it turns out that people do have lives outside of open source, and occasionally those lives start to interfere. So the lives stopped interfering at some point, and this was showing you a kind of cool screenshot. We actually made the front page of Dig, which I was very excited about. We were only there for about 5 minutes, but I was quick with the screenshot. And finally, this is showing you that news postings on the front page are kind of an indicator of how much is going on within Gentoo and how active things are. And they were up a few years ago, and then they went way down, and they're on the way back up. So Gentoo is really kind of experiencing a revival and resurgence. And that's the point I want to leave you with. Here's a couple of books I really like for trying to build stronger organizations and trying to think about things that are important in communities. So I can't recommend these 3 books highly enough. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So next up is Bruce Momjian with PostgreSQL. Oops, that's not what I want. Okay, so
This is nice.
okay. Thanks, Bruce.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to try and avoid the board like everyone else, so it's a good challenge for me. My name is Bruce Momjian. I'm one of the PostgreSQL developers. The major thing I want you to get out of my talk is that the future for Postgres is going to be different than it has been in the past, that we're going to be facing new challenges. And that's what I'm going to try and portray in the next 5 minutes. You'd like to think of an open source project as one that just sort of sets its sight on a goal and then just runs in a straight line to that goal. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. There's usually a lot of complexity getting from here to there, and there's also complexity in motivating volunteers to get from here to there. So the actual path ends up looking kind of more like this. In fact, if you can see this, it's kind of hard, but basically this road that's going up the mountain is not going straight up the mountain. It's going left and right, kind of meandering to get up that very steep hill, and that's kind of the way it is with open source. People would like a catapult, where you could just take a feature that we want out of Postgres, just put it in a catapult and just shoot it to the destination. But again, there are no catapults. It is a very arduous process, particularly in databases, to continue improving software that's been around for 20 years and has requirements for reliability that are very demanding. So as I said, the Postgres way is kind of back and forth to get to the goal. Companies have very clearly defined goals. Usually it revolves around money. And you have a very clear direction that everyone wants to go in. With open source, it's a lot different. Obviously, Postgres is a pure open source project, so we have people who are involved for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's involved in that they need some feature for their installation. Some people are doing it because they think it's fun. I happen to be one of those. And some people do it because they really want to help open source become more widely adopted. So again, not only do you have a sort of meandering path, but you have different goals that everyone is traveling toward. This is a very short graph showing kind of the stages that we've gone through as a project. Sort of the crash avoidance stage is always fun. It's sort of what I call the embarrassing stage. Then you have the SQL standards for us, which was important to become very SQL standards compliant. I think we succeeded very well there. And now we're moving into enterprise features, and we're kind of coming to the end of that process in terms of enterprise capabilities. I'm going to contrast two releases. This one is in 2005, and if you look at the features that we added in 2005, they're very bread and butter for an enterprise. Windows 32, particularly for deployments to laptops and mobile users, very important for testing, very important for increasing adoption. Save points, point-in-time recovery, table spaces, again, very bread and butter enterprise features, things that almost every enterprise database should have to be successful. We fast forward 3 years, you can then see that the features that we just released in February are much more esoteric. They're much more exotic. They're starting to go into new directions for a database. Some of these are unique. Some of them are very creative ways of avoiding performance issues. Again, a very different type of list than the bread and butter list that I had 3 years ago for the release. Where are we looking for the future? Basically, we're looking at, we're no longer playing feature catch-up. In fact, we're doing some very significant things with Postgres and with databases that have not been done in the past. Performance, we're going to continue to work particularly on allowing multiple CPUs and disk drives to be used for a single query. And finally, we're doing very well in the adoption mindshare. The bottom line is that we're now moving into a period where Postgres is going to be leading open source, is going to be leading other databases, not playing catch-up to them. And that's going to be the new challenge for us. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mark Shuttleworth, who's going to be talking about the Bazaar project.
So many of you folks may know me from my passion and enthusiasm for Ubuntu. My interest in distributed version control actually predates my work with Ubuntu. I became very interested in distributed version control in 2002, 2003, looking at the work of Tom Lord, who was one of the pioneers in this field. One of the things that really fascinates me is the way the open source process, the community process, is fundamentally changing the art and science of software development. So I started to look at that process and try to identify points of friction. Because I believe if we can elevate our process, then we can elevate the whole free software community, all the projects, all the distributions, in this kind of philosophical clash with the proprietary software world in terms of how best to do things. So Bazaar is a distributed version control system. It was kind of it's developed in Python, and it focuses relentlessly on a couple of key values. The first of those is to be completely cross-platform. I think what we want is we want tools which enable community participation from everywhere. A very strong value for us, and it shows up in Gentoo, for example, is to try and eliminate the barriers to participation. So somebody shouldn't have to be using a particular platform in order to be an effective participant in your project. So that's the first key value. Performance is another key value. There are faster distributed version control systems. Git is by far the fastest. There are much slower distributed version control systems that focus on other things. BZR balances those nicely. You get sub-second status times on pretty large projects. If any normal size project is not going to have any issue in performance using BZR. A key value is the idea of being adaptive to the way people want to work. One of the things I love about BZR is that you can use it like Subversion. You can use it as a centralized version control system. A lot of projects now have started doing that. You can get a checkout, you can update
You can be committed, and you can have multiple people committing to the same branch, and control the permissions of who does that. You can evolve that to a distributed workflow where everybody has their own branches. And then you can get into really amazing configurations where you can have teams collaborating around new features and individual developers, so working in sort of hybrid environments where some people are using checkouts, some people are using distributed branches. Not only that, but the way the data is arranged on disk is very interesting. You can organize and collate all of your revisions in one place, and then separately you can maintain all the branch information, so sort of paths through the revision graph effectively. And then separately from that, you can keep track of the working directories. So this gives you just a great deal of flexibility, and ultimately leads to a very smooth experience. Another key value is the idea of extensibility and hackability. It is a very strong plugin model. And what we see is that people building workflows, because to me version control systems are as much about the flow of code in an ecosystem as they are about the simple process of keeping track of revisions, right, changes. And so the way you integrate BZR into a process is either just to write plugins for it, plugins which can massage and manage the workflows that you want, or to embed BZR in something else using the BZR sort of architecting so that you can use it as a library in Python, which you can extend in C as well. Choosing Python makes it particularly hackable. We love the fact that as more and more communities are adopting it, we get this great acceleration in the number of patches, because it's very easy for people to get in and start to hack on it. And then a sort of final value, which is the idea of making sure that we fully represent all the things that people want to do to a tree. A very strong value, which is that when a new person comes to your project, you don't want to have to give him a whole bunch of rules that are enforced purely because your tools will only support you within those constraints. You want to be able to say, go and innovate, do what makes sense to you. Here are our coding guidelines, and each of us. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Armando? Yep. So next up we have a man that everybody knows as Armando to talk about the Memcached project.
Hi, I don't have any slides. I got this a little last minute because I think Brian was supposed to do this talk, and I decided to release a little project called Drizzle instead. So you really want to hear about Drizzle. I don't really have that much to say. If you pay attention to Memcached, you notice that a few things are true about it. It's a very simple, very stupid project. It is a very simple mailing list with a lot of very simple people on it who run very simple websites, which seem to be almost all of them at this point. Also, you might have noticed that we haven't had a release in 6 months, and the releases before that weren't actually all that interesting. So, fortunately, over the last 6 months, or 8 months, or a year, I guess, we've actually established a developer community around Memcached. Turns out that somebody actually wrote this thing and then left it like that. They actually finished it. He finished the project. He gave up, he left. I don't know if he's here, probably not. Thanks, Fitz. So, for a long time, Memcached didn't really have a father. It didn't have a community. It had a lot of users, it had a lot of people writing libraries. It didn't have a lot of people working on the server. Recently, we've changed that. We have people working all over the globe at this point on Memcached, and a lot of the work has really started to come together over the last few weeks. And one proof of that I'm going to show right now, unfortunately I can't hook it all up and be all pretty and white on the projector, is I'm going to exit out of Vim right here, release 126 RC1.
Yeah!
There goes this again commit over my Ebdo wireless. You can see my little black dongle. If this actually works, it'll be pretty cool. So there goes 126 RC1, which fixes all known bugs in Memcached that have been reported to us. There it goes, committed, R791. If you go to the website, you can see the dist. Just type in 126 RC1, we'll update the website in another 5 minutes. What I also want to release this week is 131. 131 adds all kinds of features that you might have heard about. probably have absolutely no information on. We have a nice binary protocol, which will make it a lot simpler for very large websites to do very odd things faster. We also have a storage engine abstraction layer, which I think is fantastic. Do you have any idea how often people fork this damn project? No, it's a lot. We were thinking about doing a logo recently. I really want to make the logo be a giant pile of forks. Everybody just wants, oh, this slot allocator, this memory allocation engine is great. I want to make it a BDB backend. I want to make a Tokyo Timer backend. I want to make it write to flat file. This is a wonderful idea. We'll do an mmap thing, we'll do this and that. So they all end up forking the projects die, we don't get the code back, wonderful. So now we have the storage engine abstraction layer with a binary protocol. We fixed a bunch of crap, and it should all work great. Thank you.
I think that's actually a first, a software release during the lightning talk. It just goes to show you how small that, how compact that Memcached codebase is. If you were doing that, why would that be? So, next up is Schmidt, who's going to talk about the, there we go, who's going to talk about the Talking Book project.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, I'm Schmidt. I'm with Literacy Bridge. Some of you may remember me from a few years at Apache. First of all, I just have a quick question. How many of you feel like the network here at OSCon has been a little slow this morning? Yeah, okay, so I've heard a lot of people say this. It probably almost feels like the way you're getting your information is someone's driving down a very bumpy dirt road and bringing it to you bit by bit. So you think that actually the network is maybe a little bit slow here. This is actually the network in most rural regions in the world. This is how people get information. So the billion people who live on $1 a day or less, this is how they learn about how to take care of their children, how to recognize when their 2-year-old is dehydrated, how to deal with that, the right mixture of sugar and salt and water to make this child get better. This is the network. It's this. It's someone driving in a truck down the road, and this is a main highway actually in a rural part of Ghana. This is how information is delivered. So, the Talking Book Project is about doing something about this. Now, how do you get information, critical information to people? I mean, it's really cool. We take for granted that we have the ability to instantly get directions to the nearest bar or wherever the party is attending, which is very cool. But what about when you need really important information and you don't have quite the same stuff we have? So what we're doing, the Talking Book Project, is we are thinking, how do you deal with this when you have no electricity, no internet, and literacy levels are low? How do people find out information? And so what we're doing is we've created a little talking book device. It's basically an MP3 player. You might think of it like a concept of iPods and podcasts. How many of you listen to podcasts? All right. So wouldn't it be cool if everyone could listen to podcasts? And they could do it on a device that was $5 to $10, that they could purchase themselves. So what we've done, let me just grab the little device here. Here we go. This is our Talking Book device. Come find me if you want to see more. We spent the last year doing the industrial design, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering on this, and a little bit of software. Now we need some open source developers to write a little bit of code for this, to write a little bit of code for the kiosk where you can upload and download things. Think iTunes, but in rural areas. We need some software developers to work on an authoring tool that allows content to program these buttons so you can create educational games, choose your own adventure games. You got to make this device fun. This device uses local batteries and uses USB for device-to-device copy. And so we've designed it entirely around local people being able to create interesting, local, and useful content and allow them to be able to get the same advantage we have with iPods and podcasts, only on things that might be more important to them, but still keep the end keys. Sorry?
Does that have a microphone?
It does have a microphone. You've got to make it participatory. So that's what we're doing. We're starting open source projects. So literacybridge.org. If you go there and you want to volunteer, click on the volunteer link and tell me if you want to be one of the founding members of our open source projects to build content around all of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next up, we have Lance Albertson talking about what's going on at Open Source Labs, or Open Source Lab. Go for it, Lance.
All right. My name is Lance Albertson. Just give you a little bit of background. I originally came from Kansas. I'm a Kansas native. I grew up on a farm, and now I get to administrate a bunch of servers and whatnot for the open source community. It's great. I was a developer with Gentoo. I still am, and I joined the OSL a year ago. A little bit of background history. We were basically created in 2003 as a way to utilize some extra bandwidth and some way to facilitate helping some of the projects that the university was using and whatnot. So some of our early projects was Gentoo and Debian and whatnot. And as word got around, we started, hosting more and more. Some of the activities we do, we provide managed and co-location hosting for a lot of open source projects. We have a wide range of hosting and whatnot, from just being smart hands to completely managed servers. And another thing that we like doing is providing on-the-job learning opportunities for development and system administration and whatnot. It's great. Our structure is basically, you probably know us mostly by our hosting side, but we also have a development and outreach side. As you can see, we have about 7 full-time employees, and then about 12 to 15 students usually doing a lot of the work. The student involvement, it's basically cut in half. We usually have about 6 developers and 6 sysadmins, and we give them real-world, practical experience on stuff. Our students have root on a lot of the servers we have on the hosting side, at least, and they understand. It's always neat when you get a new student coming in and they have that look of fear of, oh my God, there's 2 racks worth of Apache servers, and I might be able to screw that up. So that's where I come and help them and mentor them to make sure they understand how things are going. And they get to work really closely with a lot of the projects. Most people don't even know they're working with an undergraduate student. It's great. On the development side, some of the things we've been working on recently is the Oregon Virtual School District. It's a distance learning project that's part of Oregon. Greg O'Shea is working on that. It's going great. Another thing that we've been working on is with the One Laptop Per Child project. We started out by one of our students on a weekend decided he wanted to port AppyWork to the OLPC, and he did it. It caught some eyes, and then eventually we worked on getting a Helix pillar, and now we're currently getting printer support to get into the project. Outreach-wise, we have a group called the Open Source Education Lab, which is mostly tied to like the log that's on campus, but it's also a way to try and bring open source education into the CS curriculum on campus. We also recently been doing Drupal training for OSU employees, which has been going great. OSU is using Drupal in a lot of ways. And we also have a government open source conference that's in October, my bad. It's here in Portland, but its aim is more for the government sector. They have really different objectives and whatnot. A lot of them are terrified of using open source because you can't call somebody up and tell them this isn't working. So this conference is kind of aimed for those types of people, and we've had it for, this will be the 4th year that we're doing it, and it's great. Hosting-wise, we generally try to fit with the projects that have outgrown things like SourceForge or Google Code and things like that, but they can't quite afford to manage their things. That's kind of where we're at. And we also offer managing their servers. So like, if they know how to develop, but they don't know how to be a system administrator, that's where we come in. So right now, we probably provide hosting services for about 70 or more open source projects. Some of the services we include is email relays, databases, web hosting, file mirroring, as you may know, are FTP servers, and we also offer some code repositories for a lot of those open source projects. Some of our notable hosted clients, this isn't all a whole list obviously, but we host the Apache Software Foundation, Drupal, kernel.org. We actually have master.kernel.org, which is always cool, we'll go up by that. We host some stuff for OpenOffice. We host several free node servers. We have a rack full for Gentoo Linux, and we host some stuff in Debian and some very other projects. It's always a whole bunch of projects. Here's a look at our data center. It's just one row of, half of a row of many rows of space we have in there. We have a big screen out there in the front so people walking by can, kind of see what's going on if we have any alerts or things like that. Some of the specs of the data center. We have 3 phases coming in, 444 amps, different, that's 100% input. We're going to be doubling. Oh, wow. That was quick. Yes. Okay.
That was 5 minutes. Yep. Thank you. So next up we have Suarez-Potts who's going to tell us about this year in the OpenOffice project.
Okay. When I sent the slides over, I forgot to include the title page, so it just says Lightning OpenOffice or Flash presentations. Quick stats, we have up to about 150 million downloads, and the rest are less important. That's probably 1 million people who might be operating as more or less community members, 350 committers at least, most of them who are doing a lot of committing to core code, probably coming from Sun, Red Flag China, and even IBM. And then it goes down. 180, that's people who are doing interesting work on stuff that I had no idea what that refers to, because I did this at 3 in the morning. 100 people is roughly 100 languages, rather, at least 100 languages. We're probably working on a lot more than that I can't even begin to start naming, because we're starting to work on Southern African languages, North American languages, Native languages, and getting those on board will take a long time. However, there is no Office productivity suite that is addressing their needs, and so I'm trying to get them to work with us. And then it goes on. So, the focus right now has been on desktop. That is to say, OpenOffice.org was a legacy product that was created for the desktop that you have before you. However, that's been boring, and the focus in the future is obviously the web. There's not a single company, there's not a single application probably out there that is not encountering or thinking about the web. And OpenOffice.org is part of it. The idea here would be that we are imagining, and I think that every single company, every single application has exactly the same imagination, that people are going to be wanting to use the web as a resource using mobile internet devices, as it's currently called, or some sort of mobile device generally. And although I'm not saying that you can actually use OpenOffice.org in English on a mobile internet device, if you speak Chinese, you can download a version from Red Flag China, which actually has one that I saw that works on an MID, and it's kind of cool. It also uses a slightly different interface, and it's essentially OpenOffice. But this gets us to the interesting point. OpenOffice.org is an application that expresses a format using ODF, but you can use any other application to express that format. And that means that you can have a cell phone, you can have a mobile internet device, you can have whatever, and it can be expressed in the format, just a different application, and people would still be able to read it if you pass it around to them. So, 3.0 is a transition of sorts. We're starting to engage in more things that should make people happier who are, say, working in business or enterprise or whatever, and also trying to focus on getting the ODF out there. You all know what the open document format is. You've read the newspaper, I don't have to go into it, but it is the open standard format, and it is one that is being used by an increasing number of applications now because it is actually easy to work with. It is not impossibly difficult. So, we're making this better for businesses by the more productivity tools and by making it just easier for developers to start working on. That's part of our greater modularity and accessibility part. If you're a developer, if you've heard horror stories about working with OpenOffice.org, I would suggest that you revisit us And you go to some of these URLs because we're actually making it much easier. We're disruptive, but this is how you can actually help out and make it even more disruptive. We're disruptive because we are shaking markets, we are scaring enormous companies, we are changing the actual scene, and you can be part of it. The resources that I have there, you can visit us, you can contact me, I can send them to you. This is getting very interesting. The next year, we anticipate we'll go well beyond 150 million downloads. We'll probably be hitting, well, pick a number, pick a really big number, because countries throughout the world are starting to adopt it, and they're doing it in their own language, and they're passing CDs around that I haven't even begun to count. That only counts downloads. So thanks a lot.
Okay, our next speaker is Brian King for Mozdev.
You, Josh?
Go for it.
Hi everybody, my name is Brian King. I've been in the Mozilla community since 1999. Basically a hacker, but I have many other roles in the community. I want to talk to you today about Mozdev. Okay, a little bit about us, just in case you've never heard of us. We're a community site providing hosting for Mozilla developers for their projects. We became non-profit in 2004. There's about 250 active projects, but I'd say there's anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 dormant projects that could explode at the moment. Mindshare is great in our community. We have 500 developers discussing issues on the public mailing list. We've got a board of directors with wide representation, including Mozilla Corporation and Foundation employees. We're supported by donations, Mozilla Foundation grants, and corporate sponsorships. What do we provide? Some of these services are quite new. We hired an application developer last year named Doug Warner, who's done wonders for our site. We have source code hosting. Only recently Mercurial to align ourselves with Mozilla, we've switched to Mercurial. CVS is still available, this version might be available. We use Bugzilla, a bunch of communications tools, file management, web space, etc. Wiki and blogs per project statistics, permissions for each project owner to manage their project and bring in other developers. And we do all our planning in public. I have no idea what this chart is all about. It's kind of hunky. It's kind of a simplistic look on where we fit in the whole Mozilla community. There we are over on the left with our bunch of tools for developers or hosting projects. And from there, developers can push their extensions and their applications out to Mozilla add-ons, addons.mozilla.org. Or they can push them out directly to users in Firefox or Thunderbird. We host extensions and software for other Mozilla software such as Songbird, SeaMonkey, TomTom Home, Komodo. There's a whole bunch of other applications out there who have an extension system that we can host projects for, basically. So where are we at now? We did experience some growing pains in the last few years. We had some hosting woes which are largely solved, and thank you to OSU for providing some of that hosting. Developer resources, as I mentioned, hired a site developer who's done wonders. We could do more. We'd love to full-time designer and usability expert on board, which is something high on our list of priorities. The actual site design is a bit outdated. Public image and awareness. Up until Firefox, we were the #1 place to go for Mozilla software, but then Firefox took off, then addons.mozilla.org was created, and our image kind of dipped within the community. So we're trying to rectify that now. We're trying to make people aware that we're still around, we're providing new tools, and we've got a lot of great software on the site. And public funding, I think a lot of open source projects are going through similar problems with this. Unfortunately, as we grow and try to scale, money has become an issue. It's just a fact of life, unfortunately. So we're looking for new avenues for funding. And moving forward, what do we want to do? Obviously, we want to make it more feature-rich, add more items to our roadmap. We want to make it even easier for folks to host and create their extensions. Not to worry about all the, uploading pages and how do I manage the CVS or Mercurial, etc. We want to kind of automate a lot of processes so they can focus on coding. Solve the funding issue, of course. We definitely want a deeper relationship with Mozilla Foundation, or Mozilla Corporation, whether that be through some sort of affiliate status or whatever. There's lots of options. Quite simply, what we want to do is continue with our goal of supporting developers in order to proliferate Mozilla technologies and whatever is needed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Next up, Glynn Foster is going to tell us about OpenSolaris.
So this is the typical picture that you get if you look at a typical Solaris user. Pretty slow, lots of features, with disrespect to beards, but quite frankly, not really adapted to change. Within the OpenSolaris community, really, we need to get beyond these barriers, reduce them, and start looking at this sort of user group. This is a guy called Chase Cheney, 11-year-old kid, whose home project was set up in NASBox using OpenSolaris. So really, sort of the focus within the community is starting to look at user experience, making things much easier to use. While we have all these great features, if you can't get access to them, well, they're not so great. So just a couple of months ago, we released OpenSolaris 2008-05, reduced the 5 CDs or a single DVD right down to a single live CD. We took down the old Kveton installer. It was pretty difficult, lots of sort of technical documentation involved, and introduced a really easy-to-use installer. We changed the package management system to be network-based, so now you get additional packages from the network repository. We introduced ZFS as the default file system, so sort of introduced nice features that you can snapshot and clone your system prior to system upgrade. More importantly, though, we changed the default root shell to bash. We introduced the GNU utilities as a default. We started to reduce some of these sort of religious things that we had kept around for sort of compatibility reasons for years and years and years. We also introduced the new site, OpenSolaris.com. We decided to sort of split out the development from the use of OpenSolaris. A lot of sort of developers were getting kind of touchy that a whole bunch of users were coming into their space and sort of getting in the way, asking relatively non-technical questions about the use rather than the development. Just in context to the development, since Sun released the source code about 3 years, we've had a pretty long evolution in terms of getting the source code out the door. We were using a revision control system called Teamware. A lot of the development was still happening behind the closed source, closed source environment behind the firewall. We decided many years ago to actually move to Mercurial, but until sort of the next 2 weeks, we actually were just maintaining a bridge between Teamware and Mercurial. So early next month, we're going to actually move internally to Mercurial, and then a couple of weeks later, we're actually going to shift those gates outside the firewall. In combination to that, we're starting to use Bugzilla for bug tracking, and really want to get to a stage where we can actually have direct commits to the gate. But still, this is a sort of typical environment of OpenSolaris.org, really. Much like Gentoo, we have a whole bunch of poisonous people who really don't like change.
we're slowly starting to turn that around. We really sort of need to get involved and create a really sort of positive community. We had a new OpenSolaris governance board elected this year, bringing a lot of positive energy. We made a mistake several years ago of actually creating a governance system before we really had a community. That didn't work so well. Just starting to simplify the governance, really looking about what we need to help users actually get, or help developers actually get off with what they want to do, which is pretty much write code and contribute and stuff, rather than worry about the bureaucracy of the community. So we're going to introduce things like code to Connex, whatnot, and really sort of create a fun sort of place. Thanks.
Thank you.